Watching The Devil Wears Prada 2 made me realise something uncomfortable. Some workplaces don't just ask for your time, they slowly ask you to become someone else. Alright, so surely by now you've seen the first Devil Wears Prada movie, in which a young journalism graduate named Andy starts working as the second assistant for a lady by the name of Miranda Priestley. She is the top person within a magazine, a very, very successful magazine, fashion magazine. And as you're watching the movie, you're starting to realize the different workplace dynamics. You're starting to see different things and how Andy changes from being someone who, probably like me, wearing sweats and just chilling, to someone that's into high fashion, and some of the choices that she makes along the way, the consequences of those choices, the things that people do in response to that. And so her boyfriend accuses her by the end of being somebody else that he doesn't recognize anymore. They end up breaking up and things. And so watching the second one, which is set almost like 20 years after the first one, was quite interesting to sort of see the things that were the same and what's changed, how workplaces themselves have changed over the last 20 years. So I thought we might sort of reflect on a couple of things today. So that leads me to my first of 3 points, which is adaptation versus authenticity. So it can be really idealistic almost to kind of want to be who you are at all times. And maybe this is just my older millennial training, where we got some of what Gen Z got in terms of when you're in the workplace, you leave your personal life at the door. Or another piece of advice we were told was, if you can't find enough things to do, then maybe you don't want your job well enough, really promoting that busyness. Being a different person, you put on your work persona versus being who you really are. I think those are some of the extreme kind of examples where sometimes we adapt. We sort of think, okay, we need to dress a certain way, act a certain way. Maybe we're not behaving in ways that are representative to who we truly are on the inside. And we're sort of working out that, hey, some of that adaptation has actually cost us, like seeing how Andy lost her relationship, some of her friends, and ultimately by adapting like that, she seemed to not recognize who she was at the end of the movie. So sometimes, we will adapt because we think, okay, we need to do that in order to be able to survive. It is a survival mechanism. But sometimes when we adapt too much, that it pulls away from who we authentically are. We can sometimes find ourselves wondering, well, who am I? And the people that I surround myself with, that, are we in that situation where we don't actually like any of them? Or have we found sometimes that actually this has been better for me because I actually really like the person I am now. Not all of this has to be bad. Is it that you were authentically showing up, but you've adapted how you authentically show up so that it is able to help you to get further along in your career, maybe to be able to take advantage of some opportunities that there are, and being able to have more impact perhaps by adapting. You might be a sweats wearing girl, and you've had to go a bit more corporate. You've had to bring some more of the more corporate or professional lingo into your vernacular, where you might not have in the past, or you might never have thought that you would be doing that, but it's actually helped you by adapting into that to actually have more impact, to be able to reach more people, to be able to achieve some of your goals without compromising who you truly are. Or maybe you've adapted so hard that you now don't know who you are. So that's one point. The next point that watching The Devil Wears Prada 2 helped me to realize was the whole dynamic between power and people pleasing. So when you watch the dynamics between Andy comes off as a real people pleasing person. She wants to do well. She wants to fit in. She wants to keep her job, which comes with an element of having to do the things that makes you then be accepted, as shown in the movie, how she started wearing her hair and makeup differently, wearing different clothes. I mean, she was in a position where she could actually borrow designer clothing from the magazine's stores. I don't know how realistic that is. I think a different YouTube video that I watched said that it wasn't realistic for that. But I guess it's a nice example. I mean, a movie is entertaining after all. It's not meant to be a depiction of real life necessarily. I mean, surely we would call that a documentary. But anyway, Andy showed kind of that naivety, that young, youthful, hopeful manner that I think resonates within all of us as having been that person at some stage. But then she also the movie shows the power dynamic as well. You had Miranda Priestly in the first few minutes of the movie when the driver tips off to the first assistant, Emily, that she's on her way in, and she was coming in earlier than expected, and everybody suddenly shares that message. Everyone goes to panic stations. Everyone quickly goes and cleans up, and they tidy up. They go and completely change what the working environment looked like in that moment. Everyone seemed so tense. Everyone seemed so stressed, and they had out specific things for her. You know, that she had to have a glass of particular water on her desk for when she walked in, and things like that. Organizing that workspace for that one specific person, stopping everything that they were doing in order to be able to actually change to make the situation what that person wanted, because that was the person in power. That was the person who said, you get to keep your job or you don't get to keep your job. That was a person that that held so much sway within the industry. So sometimes that person then, as shown in the movie, Miranda, was then making all kinds of decisions, whether they were nice or not, or ethical or not ethical, or anything like that, in order to keep that power. So you've got people that have the power and want to keep the power. You've got the people that don't have the power, who will please or do their best to try to please the people in power. And then you've got someone like Nigel, who in the movie we see, in the first Devil Wears Prada, we see that he had an opportunity to branch out on his own, and it was going to be a step-up position. When he comes into Andy's room with some champagne, and they were toasting to this new position he was going to have, which then due to Miranda's influence became a position that went to somebody else, her main competition, someone who was going to take away from her the power and position that she had. So she manipulated behind the scenes in order to be able to get that person into the position that Nigel actually had been given. So then Nigel doesn't get that position. So then Nigel ends up being a person who is peripheral to that person in power, whether it is that supporting, subservient, that kind of a role. Is that what a person who starts out like Andy, idealistic, has your own ideas and direction and thoughts, who then people pleases in order to fit in? Do you become Nigel later on because you stay within that? I don't really know. But it was interesting to sort of see the different dynamics in that, and to think about how that actually plays out in my workplace or previous workplaces I've been in. So I thought that was something pretty cool. And I mean, I'm not saying too much about The Devil Wears Prada 2 because it's only just come out. So I'm sure there are plenty of people that still want to watch it. So I'm trying to just more draw on the first one, even though it was the whole fact that the second movie has come out. And I was going to see it with some work friends, so I thought I better watch the first one to remind myself of what it was about, because it's been like nearly 20 years since I watched it. And then coming in and watching the second one. So that's what's got me thinking a lot about the different layers and the different things I've been seeing within it. Okay, which brings me to my next point, reflection number 3, which is why sensitive people burn out in prestige environments. And I think sometimes when you are a sensitive person, there is a lot of adaptation that you are doing, because let's face it, the corporate business, a lot of workplace culture and organization is not usually conducive for sensitivity. Sometimes it is, and that is awesome. And I mean, if you work in an environment as a sensitive person who is able to be in a place where sensitivity is accepted, included, and is part of what your organization is about, man, I think that's pretty awesome. For the most of us, we don't. We can work in fast-paced environments. We can work in environments that are more geared towards output. We can be working in environments that are more about us serving others, while not necessarily receiving anything back, anything helpful back. We might also be finding ourselves working in environments that are highly competitive. I would imagine, in those top echelon, top level in many industries, like what is displayed in The Devil Wears Prada at the top, the most prestige fashion magazine, with that kind of equivalent in lots of different industries. I imagine that people do have that level of competitiveness within one another. Maybe not to that extreme, or maybe it is. Or maybe the movie is a way tamer example of what it might be like to be in that kind of an industry. I don't know. Or that kind of level. I don't know. I've never worked at that kind of a level before. So for me, watching that sort of stuff is still entertaining. So yes, coming back to why sensitive folks can burn out in those environments, it's because we keep giving. And we don't necessarily have decent boundaries around our own energy. We might also be taking in all of that energy, that stress, that pressure, all of those feelings that other people perhaps are broadcasting in their own way of being. When we're sensitive to energy, or we're intuitive to other people's needs and their feelings and things like that, we tend to take in all of that in our surroundings. And if we aren't good at being able to, like I said before, set up some boundaries around that, or if we don't have really good mechanisms for being able to actually discharge that, so say at the end of a day we don't have a good wind down work routine or anything like that, it can make it really challenging, and that we can easily burn out in that kind of environment, because there's only so much that you can take in. There's only so much you can give out before it's no longer possible for you to function properly. We also might be gentle, kind, caring people in an environment where that might actually be dangerous. So say if you are in in some kind of law enforcement type situation, when you're in an active situation, sometimes being kind and caring and nurturing is not the correct response to what is happening in the environment around you. If it could be the difference between life and death, or maybe it actually used to be, like, have you seen those memes where it shows like a tiger or something like that, one of those big dangerous animals, and in the wild, and the caption might say something like, if not friend shaped, if not friend, why friend shaped? Because the natural reaction is everyone's like, oh my god, look at the fluffy kitty, I want to pat it, and then they get mauled. So while authentically you might be that person who loves the fluffy animals and who wants to pat them, you've got to adapt to that environment. You've got to be savvy of what's going on around you to kind of go, that is not a friendly kitty cat to be patting, at least not straight up. Maybe I've got to befriend it first. Maybe there's other things I need to do first. Also, in our way of being service oriented, even if you're not in a service position, when you're sensitive, you kind of anticipate a little bit sometimes about what people might need or want. So sometimes you end up being the person that because you're easy to talk to, people will just come and dump their emotionalness on you, or they might give their frustrations to you, and then they feel better walking away, but you don't. You've just had a heap put on you, or because you were always so nice and so kind that people sometimes take advantage of that, and you end up getting more and more work, and other people get to not have that same situation happen to them, and you sit there just going, what the heck, I'm bending over backwards here to do all the things that people are asking me to do, to be the team player, to fulfill obligations, to do the things I was led to believe we're meant to be doing, but yet I seem to be drowning while others aren't. Another thing that also can come with that, and why a sensitive person might burn out in these kind of environments, is because of that interplay between those with power, those without, and how you are actually responding and working within that. It can be really challenging when you feel like you have no power. Like the times in the movie, I think it was a couple of times, Andy said something along the lines of, I had no choice. When either Miranda or Emily or, her boyfriend or anything asked her, how could you do that? Or why are you doing that? And she really felt like she had no choice, that there was no other good alternative. So in a way, us sensitive people can empathize with that, because we too have probably felt at some point like there wasn't any agency. We didn't have any other good choice. We had to, put up certain walls, or we had to adapt in certain ways, or we had to do certain things that we were not as comfortable with, because we felt like if we didn't, then we would lose our job, or we would no longer be in a position to be able to get considered for promotions, or that we might not be treated fairly within the workplace, or things like that. Sometimes it's only the illusion of not having any agency, when it can be so easy on the outside to sort of say, well, just get another job. Well, sometimes getting another job is not as straightforward or as simple as we would like to make out. So sometimes when we feel like we have no other choices but to go along with things that do compromise our authenticity, that causes us to adapt more than what we actually are willing to do, when we feel like we have no power, and that the only way to survive, because that's what we've learnt over the years, is how to survive, and it gets reinforced over and over and over again, that people pleasing is a survival mechanism that we have adapted to, whether that has been helpful or not. It certainly was helpful at some point, but then at some point it's it becomes no longer adaptive. It becomes maladaptive and harmful, which is when we start to be burning out, when we find ourselves going through the same situation over and over again. And it's funny because this is something that I have gone through many, many times. And you'd think, as a person in her early 40s who has been working since she was a teenager, in various different industries, different roles, different everything, but has had a lot of customer service, whether it was front facing with a new person, whether it were, retail, or with the general public or something like that, or whether it was internal, like when I used to work in procurement. So I had the different sites around Australia that I would actually be working with, so it was internal to the company, but I didn't actually work with them face to face. It was just through emails, phone calls, that sort of thing. I found myself burning out, and it's funny because when I think about the kind of work that I was doing, I was mostly sitting in front of a computer and getting those phone calls, reading those emails that would just keep coming and coming and coming, and I would be feeling so stressed. And sometimes there would be times where you'd be doing overtime because a critical part has gone down, and the site did not have one as a spare of that particular part. They didn't have a spare. They were meant to have a spare on hand, but for whatever reason, they don't have a spare. Maybe they didn't replace it last time, maybe because it's an expensive part, who knows. But now the situation is that that critical part that has now broken or is not working in some way is not able to have that particular bit of equipment or machinery working. And for every day that machine is down, the company loses, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, whatever, in lost production. So I remember having to stay back after I'd finished work and try and sort that out. So here's me on the phone to the supplier, who's having to then contact the United States. Now I'm in Australia, so there is a decent time difference, and then confirm with them that they can actually ship the part on the next flight out from the US to Australia to be able to get it to my site, because once I get in Australia, I then need to get it shipped to where it needs to be. So there was a lot of different parts within that. Very high stress. Even thinking about it now, my shoulders are tensing, my back is tensing, and my jaw is tensing a bit. And this is a situation from 15 odd years ago, and I'm still having that same response. And I mean, end of the day, yeah, it cost probably twice as much to ship the things so quickly than the actual item cost, but we managed to do it in a couple of days, and yay, brilliant. We're not losing quite so much money. Yay, the company gets to survive. Given that this was in mining, it's not like they're short of $1, but that's probably a whole nother conversation for a whole nother time. But that's kind of the thing, you kind of had to adapt, and I find myself in different situations every day now, even as a nurse. So that was back in my procurement days, but even as a nurse, you find yourself in that same kind of situation sometimes, where you have that professionalism, you've got that perception of what a nurse is and what a nurse isn't. And yes, that is definitely different today compared to what it might have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, just look at how the uniforms have changed. Look at the reactions people have about tattoos, piercings, hair color, things like that are more accepted now compared to what they used to be. So there is that adaptation versus authenticity tug that goes there. And then you've got the power and the people pleasing. There is so much service. I mean, in nursing, so many of us come to it because we want to help others. And we do, but then we also drain our energetic reserves, busting our butts to answer every call bell, to do every set of obs, to give every medication, to do all the things that are required of us within the time period that our shift is on. And when you're working in a hospital or in any other kind of fast-paced environment, sometimes you can feel like no matter how hard you work, no matter what you've done, you've not been able to measure up. There's always someone who's not been able to have a shower, or someone who maybe had saw themselves while waiting for you to help them to get to the bathroom. And that can be because you need another person and a piece of equipment to help you do that. And sometimes you're running around trying to find all those things. Family members or the patient themselves or something, you're never going to be able to actually meet everybody's desires. You might not be able to do all of the things you would love to do, to be able to give people just that little bit more time, because you can see that they're lonely and they just want someone to talk to, or they've been delivered some devastating news and they're trying to figure out how to process it. And sometimes they just could do with someone just sitting there with them, not rushing off to go do something else. But it is so hard to actually facilitate something like that. So then you feel like you're a terrible nurse. You feel like you're barely making any kind of a difference. You come home feeling so dispirited because you couldn't do what you felt was needed to be done. You did the bare minimum that day when you really wanted to give more, but you couldn't in the time constraints that you had, or the resources constraints that you have. There aren't enough people, it feels like, on the floor sometimes to do all of those things, to not rush through doing stuff, to be able to give each person the time that they might need that actually will help with their healing much more. So I guess a big long story to come down to the fact that when you look at a situation like shown in The Devil Wears Prada, The Devil Wears Prada 2, your own workplace, sometimes you do end up coming to the conclusion that success that costs your nervous system and identity may not actually be success. And so whether that means that you need to redefine what success means for you, or whether you do end up sprucing up your resume, looking into a different workplace, looking into a different industry to work in, maybe doing some retraining. At the end of the day, sometimes just sitting down and understanding, well, what is success? What could be a new definition of success? Because you might enjoy doing what you do, like I do. I love being a nurse. But I had to sit down and realize that success for me might be getting to my breaks. It might be leaving on time, even if I didn't do all the things that I would have loved to have done. Success might actually be, to me, being able to sleep without the aid of a bunch of different medications to try and help me sleep. So what do you think? If you're thinking about what success might mean to you, share it in the comments below. What does success actually mean, and how can you work with your nervous system and your identity to redefine what success actually means in the context of your work, and how you're able to then live? Because we all need to live. We all end up needing to do some work because we all need some money in order to be able to keep a roof over our heads, food in our tummies, to get us from place to place, that sort of a thing. So tell me, what does success mean to you now, and after you've had a moment to actually define it for yourself? All right. See you next time.